Today's story is crazy. It's about an abuse of power, and you will not believe who the heck was abusing their power.
Don't ever be in a hurry in life. The progress of someone should not make you feel stagnated, to the point whereby you then make decisions out of pressure. I'm the second girl among the 4 daughters which my parents gave birth to. My father owned a salon downtown while my mother worked at a liquor store. We're not rich, but nobody could intimidate us. Among the 4 daughters which my parents had, I was the only one who went to high school. Going to college was never really an option for me, for obvious reasons. No money. The 4 of us were all made to learn a trade or get a job to help out in the house. My father had learned to survive on his own, and he was teaching us to do the same. My sisters began getting married at some point, and though I've never really seemed disturbed, it became a thing of concern when even my younger sisters both got married, and I was left in my father's house. To make matters worse, I was not even in a serious relationship. Neither was there someone who was interested in me at the time. The few people who had dealings with me in the past left a while after they slept with me. There was no real reason as to why I was yet to be in a committed relationship. It wasn't my fault in any way, it was just the way it was. I guessed that when the time was right, I would find my own man, get married. That was just the wishful thinking because the time never got right for me. I just kept living in my parents' house while my sister was comfortably staying with their husbands. My parents never made me uncomfortable, but I felt uneasy. I began seeing myself as a form of disappointment and all. The pain would grow worse when either of my sisters visit us with their husbands or children. I would act like I was overjoyed to have them around, but I cried my eyes out when they left. It's not like they rubbed it in my face or anything. No, my sisters aren't like that. In fact, they've previously tried their best to set me up with some guys, in the hope that I could result in something really good. But it never did. I was what people would call wife material. It's a term that meant that a lady was the complete package, which a guy would ever need in a wife. It meant that she could cook, take care of her man, her home, bring some things to the table, and still respect her husband regardless. Yeah, I was a wife material without a husband. I soon became desperate, and my desperation turned against me. I was anxiously waiting for the first man to propose. I'd not require anything of what I needed him to look or have. My only requirement was that he should just be a man. Yeah, I was that desperate. The first man who picked interest in getting married to me was Pete, a policeman. Even though he tried severely hard to sleep with me before marriage, sex is off the table. I was not willing to go the same route that would see me ending up single after a while. I made up my mind to keep sex pending till after marriage, celibacy. I did my best, though, to try keeping his interest in me alive. I would visit him twice a week, cook for him, and do his laundry. I spent part of the little money which I earned working 2 jobs on him. Each time we discussed, I would try directing our conversations towards marriage. But he acted like he didn't pick up with my clue. After a while, I became frustrated and had to outrightly ask him what his plans for me were, because I was not going to spend my life acting like his wife when he was yet to make me one. That's when he decided to come see my parents and declare his intention to get married. My parents were not in support of me getting married to Pete. They said he was a cop, and cops were criminals in this part of the country where we stayed. They even told my other sister, who shared the same notion. I understood that they meant the most of the cops in our town were corrupt, but I felt that it was wrong to generalize every cop as corrupt. I was desperate, and in my desperation, I ignored all their advice. I just needed to get married and get out of my parents' house. If only I knew what the best days to remain single rather than getting married to this wrong person. Well, Pete and I got married, and that's when the problem began. It was true that I'd become a married lady who lived in her husband's house, but I was far from living my best life. Desperation had cleared out my eyes, and from the first week of our marriage, I realized that I've made a serious mistake. But rather than opt out, I decided to manage things because it's just too early. I was trying to avoid the fact that my people may have been right when they said that every cop, including Pete, would make a terrible husband. Everything was just bad in the home. Pete was not a good lover, not a good husband. He did not have the faintest idea of how a husband should treat a wife. He simply didn't care. He kept late nights, would often sleep outside because of his, quote, job. And I knew his job was just a facade to continue sleeping around. I never confronted him, though. I focused on being good and a submissive wife, as my mother was to my father. But it was really difficult turning a blind eye to something that glared at you, especially when every other person saw and pointed it out. I gave birth to our son within the first year of our marriage, and I resumed work when I was strong enough. The birth of our son did not bring some sense into my husband. As a matter of fact, he grew worse. He became a policeman both at work and at home. He monitored my every step and would become jealous when he found a guy talking to me. I guess that was him being afraid that I was trying to do to him what he's been doing to me all along. It was not long, and soon he began accusing me of sleeping with the whole neighborhood. I was taken aback by his accusations because I've been faithful in our marriage from the very first day. It's just hypocritical for him to accuse me of cheating when news of his escapades with women were flying around town faster than the newspaper. And, well, he refused being discreet about it. I denied the accusations and then made mine. I told him things which he never expected to hear. They were not insults. No, they were simply the truth that I harshly expressed. He reacted as though he was in a war front. That was the first time that he hit me. Yeah, he hit me. All because I told him the truth. What a silly excuse he was for a man. I'm pretty sure that if it were some robbers wanting to engage in a gunfight with him, he would have shamelessly hid it away. But of course not, since it's because I'm just his little defenseless wife, a woman. He hit me hard. I was fed up. I was not going to sit around and take any more of his stupidity. I waited for him to leave for work before leaving with our son. It was from my father's house that I filed for a divorce. He did not seem disturbed by me leaving. He was only interested in custody of his son. Well, the judge ruled that I take custody, and he was to pay child support. If I had it my way, though, I would not even want to train my child with his money, which was most certainly gotten from extorting individuals. Things were quiet with me and my son for some time, but my ex-husband Pete soon started showing up unannounced at my place to ask me to hand over the custody of our son to him. Well, obviously, I ignore him. His visits become more frequent, and he would sometimes come to me at odd places like the grocery store. It was more like he was stalking me. He was making threats, which soon began getting to me. I kept it to myself for a while, but it got to the point where one could not keep quiet anymore. I had to speak to my parents about it. My father was not taking any of that nonsense. He already had disdain for police, and more especially a cop who had maltreated his daughter. Well, he traced Pete down to his home and warned him to stay clear of me. I've never seen him like this. My son and our entire family, he said. Pete became furious and a heated argument ensued, which saw my father almost fight him, if not for the fact that people intervened. My father came back home that night and relayed all that's happened to me and my mom. I knew Pete was not going to let the matter be, but I never expected what I saw coming. We're awoken by the sound of a siren blaring into our compound the very next morning. Pete came with some of his colleagues and arrested my father for assaulting a police officer. It wasn't funny at all. My father never assaulted him. My father had not laid a finger on him, in fact. All my father did was what any other reasonable parent was going to do. My ex-husband who accused my father of assault was actually the one who assaulted someone. Me. He was literally arresting my father for a crime which he, the officer, committed. My mom and I rushed down to the police station to rectify the situation, but it was of no avail. The system was just corrupt, and there was really nothing we could do there. I was left with no other option than to visit Pete in his house and plead with him to let my father go. Well, my plea fell on deaf ears. He only agreed to let my father go if I gave up custody of our child. He gloated by saying that he could send my father away for the rest of his life, and none of us would be able to do a thing about it. So, I left my ex-husband's house that day with a clue of what to do. If I had my way, I would have done the very thing in my head was telling me to do, and that was to kill him. I was going to off my ex-husband without remorse, but though my head wanted it, my hand could not execute the plan. I didn't have the means. One thing was certain, though. We had to act fast before my father was taken to court, and the sentence was passed. It got to the point that we had lost my dad for good. My mom was not really herself for the next few days. Her blood pressure rose, and my older sister had to take her over to her home so that she could be distracted by her grandchildren. I felt bad and guilty because I'd brought it on to my family. If I'd only listened to them and not gotten married to Pete, then this whole drama would not have played out. My father was being held up in a cell because I was too desperate to reason. He was suffering because he tried defending his daughter who did not listen to him. The next few days that followed Pete calling me to ask what my decision was. He was just happy watching me in distress, and he made the most out of it. He would go on talking over the phone and that he could make the whole thing go away as easily as he made it appear, and all I had to do was give up custody of our son. Then it dawned on me that I could actually save my father and keep my son. My ex-husband had been gloating about being responsible for making the whole thing appear. If only I could get him to admit orchestrating the whole thing in front of a judge. I called Pete to arrange a meeting with him where I would give him my verdict. Pete and I both met at his place, and I asked him if he was sure that he could end what he had started. I was very careful about my choice of words because I needed to entrap him. He soon admitted that he hadn't used the situation to his advantage because he needed custody of our son. But if I complied, then my father would be discharged before the end of the day. I agreed to his demand by telling him that I was going to meet with the lawyer to put an agreement paper thereby giving up custody to my son. I could see the satisfaction that covered Pete's face as he felt that he had successfully bullied our child out of my hands. Unknown to him, I had recorded our discussion and I was going to use it against him. I met with my lawyer, but it was not to sign any custody agreement. It was to slam my ex-husband with a lawsuit for abuse of power and the unlawful arrest against my father. My ex-husband called to threaten me as soon as he was served the court papers. He threatened to make sure we never saw our father again. His threat was nothing new, so it didn't really bother us much. What he did not know was that I had substantial evidence to put him away for good. If only he knew what was coming his way, he would have ran out of town. The next time that I met face-to-face with my ex-husband was in court. Within a short while after the case began, the recording of our discussion was presented before the judge. My ex-husband grew cold as the whole court heard him and admit falsely accusing my father, wrongly arresting him and trying to blackmail me into giving up custody of our son. The case was a very swift one. My ex-husband was sentenced to 25 years in prison with hard labor, while he would still be investigated for corruption among the police force, and if found guilty, he would have an extended prison time. His little property, which he'd gotten through extortion and other illegitimate means, would be forfeited to the government, who would pay me my little percentage of it. The judge ordered the immediate release of my father, who was still compensated with $10,000. 2 months later, I paid a visit to my ex-husband, Pete. Pete was in prison. It was not to wish him well. Au contraire, I wanted to let him know that I was going to make sure the child we shared took on my name, and he would never be a part of his life. I was surprised at how he transformed within 2 minutes of being in prison. He was battered and broken by some prison inmates whom had sent there. That served him right. He was getting all what he deserved, and upon investigation, some other corrupt officers that worked closely with my ex-husband were uncovered, and they were equally taken off the force. I got paid 5% of the loot which my ex-husband gotten, even though it mattered little to me. I went on to get a job and managed a hotel. Well, it's been 2 years ever since, and even though my life has not been the best, it has been peaceful at least. I'm not in a hurry to get married, even though I'm currently seeing someone. A divorcee with a son, too. I've come to realize that no matter what anyone has, or the position that they might be in, never let it be a yardstick to measure your own success story. I had let the pressure coming from the fact that my sisters had all gotten married push me into a wrong marriage, and I paid the ultimate cost. I only hope my kids will be able to learn from all my mistakes.
So this story was absolutely devastating. I noticed that this story did not take place in America. It said in the comments it was in a Latin American country. I only have one thought about that. How many places in the world does something like this happen so often? Where a cop's basically able to bribe people or use his power. I know it happens all over the world, but let me know if you guys know of any exact scenarios, because to be honest, I was starting to think this story was fake, but the more comments I was reading, this kind of thing happens all the time apparently. So guys, let me know your thoughts about this. Do you think justice was served and the police officer got the karma that he must needed? Drop your comments down below, and let's take a second to announce that I have started my new Instagram channel. If you aren't following it yet, I do have daily reels, Instagram green screens, and all sorts of behind the scenes stuff. You can find that directly below in the description section along with my other 2 YouTube accounts. Check those out, guys. Have a wonderful day, and Mr. Reddito will catch you on the next one.